Well, yesterday, Democrats in the Senate blocked the advancement of a bill that would prevent a doctor from simply ignoring a newborn who survives a botched abortion procedure, in action that inevitably leads to the death of that newborn child. All 47 Democrats voted against the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act. That prevents Republicans from getting the 60 votes needed to secure a vote on the measure. That's a procedural vote. It's known as cloture. Now, they accused Republicans of using false narratives and fear-mongering, saying, oh, no, this never happens. It's not a problem. Well, joining me to separate fact from fiction is the senator who introduced the bill, Senator James Lankford of Oklahoma, and with him is Josiah Presley, the survivor of a first trimester abortion. Senator Lankford, Josiah, thanks for joining me today. Great to see both of you.
Absolutely glad to do it, Tony.
Thanks for having me.
Josiah, good to see you again. Before we unpack this, I want to get your reaction to something that just happened within the last couple of hours. President Trump signing pardons for the pro-lifers who were unjustly targeted and jailed by the Biden administration under the FACE Act. Your response, Senator?
Yeah, it's good to be able to see on that. As people get the context of this was a time when abortion clinics were were pro-life pregnancy resource centers were being attacked, were being defaced, were having graffiti on them. People were being afraid. The Department of Justice wouldn't step in and protect those individuals, but individuals that were speaking out for life around abortion clinics, they were being jailed. So literally, the Department of Justice was saying, pregnancy resource centers, you don't need protection. Abortion clinics, you do, and we're going to overprotect you. So this was a response from President Trump, as a positive response to say, hey, we're going to be back to equal justice under the law, and these individuals aren't going to be targeted because of their beliefs about the value of children.
Well, it certainly reestablishes a sense of justice in this country. It's unfortunate that we have to wait for a new president to come in to establish justice in a system that is ruled by law. We should be able to trust our laws, but it's the unequal application of them that creates this problem. Senator, let's get to the bill that you introduced yesterday on the Senate floor. It was blocked by Democrats. Unpack for our viewers and our listeners what this bill would do.
It's a very straightforward, well, what I consider a common sense, common ground kind of bill. This is not about abortion at all. This is literally if an abortion is carried out, but the abortion, instead of destroying the child in the womb, the child is actually delivered. What do you do in that case where a child is actually delivered? They're literally crying and breathing on the table in front of you. Now you have a fully delivered child in front of you. Do they get medical care or not? This seems like a no-brainer. I don't run into anyone that says you do abortion after a child is fully delivered, but that is the current practice. The current practice now is they can't take the life of that child at the table. That'd be infanticide. So what they do is they basically back away and allow the child to die on their own right in front of them. I think that's horrific to just allow a child to be able to die of exposure. And so we're trying to step in and to say, hey, where are we as a culture? Post-abortion conversation here, just delivery conversation. Can't we at least agree that when a child is fully delivered, they should get medical care? And painfully yesterday, Democrats said no. If it was intended to be an abortion, even after they're fully delivered and alive on the table, their life should still be taken from them. I think that's abhorrent, and I think that's very extreme and well past where the American people are.
Yeah, I think you made that point very clearly yesterday on the Senate floor. That's not America. That's certainly not how we want to be known. Josiah, you spoke at our Pray Vote Stand Summit back in 2021, and Senator, I don't know if you know this, but I know Josiah at the Pray Vote Stand Summit, as we began to have a conversation, his father was my youth minister back when I was in high school there in Oklahoma. So I know you have an affinity for youth ministers, having overseen the campground there in Oklahoma for summer camp for churches. But Josiah, for those that haven't heard your story, can you share that with us?
Yeah, so I grew up in Oklahoma. I'm adopted. I'm one of 12 kids, 10 of us being adopted. And my story, my adopted parents, when I was 13 years old, they told me more about my adoption story. And they told me how 2 months into my birth mother's pregnancy with me in South Korea, she actually underwent a DNC abortion, a type of abortion where the doctor goes into the mother's womb and rips the baby apart and brings them out in pieces. This obviously was a lot for me to take in at 13. And as a kid who'd grown up in the church, who'd grown up very pro-life, and with these Christian convictions, it was a lot for me to take in. Something I struggled with for years. And then it wasn't really until I was 16 and I surrendered my life to Jesus, actually at Falls Creek, that God changed my heart. And as I found value and worth in Him, I also began to see that in everybody's life, in every human being's life. And that's then flowed into a lot of the advocacy I'm able to do now.
Yeah, Josiah, kind of walk us through how you dealt with this revelation that your parents shared with you, and then when you hear people today, just like on the Senate floor yesterday, saying, "Well, this doesn't happen; it's not really a problem."
Yeah, so I mean, so at the age of 13, and for a number of years, I struggled with a lot of anger and really a lot of hatred and hurt over the circumstances surrounding my birth. I knew what we believed as Christians and what we believed as people who were pro-life. And that's just talking about my birth mother, her decision for abortion, that was a first trimester abortion. And even when we think about this act that was voted against yesterday, that's not even talking about abortion. And to me, the scary and really the disheartening thing that I think that really we should hear and be thinking about as American people is we're not talking about abortion there. What we're talking about is a baby who's been born.
Right.
Like that should be an easy threshold. That should be an easy common ground thing for us to all say, hey, yeah, human life, they're born, they're valuable. We ought to protect them. And we can't even find that common ground there. And that's very concerning, I think.
I mean, we're talking infanticide is what we're talking about, is allowing a child to die. In fact, if you go back to the origins of the church, that's where the church really made its first incursion into society, was taking those abandoned babies and caring for them. And as a Christian society, I mean, we want to identify ourselves as a Christian society, at least the majority does. This is a no-brainer, as you pointed out, Senator.
Yeah, this should be easy. Democrats were saying, well, this is going to be some secret backdoor way to instruct doctors or to be able to punish doctors that aren't doing care. But quite frankly, every physician has basic Hippocratic oath to do no harm, and then to do basic care. If you've got a living child in front of you, there's a responsibility to be able to take care of a living child, not back away. And this doesn't happen often, but it does happen. And then the question is, when it does happen, what are we going to do? And currently, we've not even been able to agree on that.
Josiah, there is a growing number of those who have survived abortions who are now speaking out. There's a network. Speak to that for a moment, how that has been helpful in just having those conversations with others who have had some of the similar experiences that you've had.
Yeah, so when I first found out the origins of my story and I was navigating what it meant to be an abortion survivor, frankly, I thought I was one that was far and few between. Like, I was not aware of very many others. And as I've been able to connect with specifically Melissa Oden, as she's the one who's founded the Abortion Survivors Network, it's been crazy to see the number of people who have come out of the woodworks, who actually are abortion survivors, who are going through that grief or going through that pain, that anger, trying to sort out those pieces of their story. And so it's been really encouraging for me personally in my own journey as I've been sorting through it as I go, but then also to see that I'm not alone. And it's also a reminder, though, of the humanity of the unborn. More and more of us get through, and those who get through, they're the proof, they're the reminder, they're the living, walking, breathing voice to us all that the unborn, they're human, and they're valuable, and we ought to protect them.
Josiah, let me ask you this, because you've done a lot of this in terms of advocacy and having conversations. It's hard to push back when people hear your story. But for those that need to engage their elected representatives, whether it's at the state level or the federal level, obviously in this bill, how would you suggest they approach this conversation and politely push back on this narrative that it doesn't really happen, this bill's not necessary?
Yeah, I think actually just talking to Senator Lankford earlier and just hearing some of the things that he brings up when he talks about asking them, okay, we have to consider there's three people involved in an abortion, the father, the mother, and the child. And he's brought up, and I think this is a really good question. At what point does a child become a child and should have that protection? And I think that's something every one of our elected officials should have to answer. I think that's something every elected official should have to answer because that's something they're answerable to the people on. We should be able to know where elected officials stand on that and how they're going to vote on that, how they're going to pass legislation on that, because we're literally talking about a life and death situation here.
Yeah.
And it's so important, I think, for the people to ask those questions.
So, Senator Lankford, for
Senator
Lankford, for now, is this bill, I mean, is it going to move forward? Is there going to be another attempt on it, or is it finished?
So it is finished in the Senate for now. The House picked it up, they passed it. And what's interesting, the House and the Senate both had a majority vote for this. But as you mentioned at the top of this conversation, you have to have 60 to be able to move it. But we had 52 votes. That's a majority of the Senate agrees with this, but we don't have enough to be able to move it. The House did have a majority when they voted on it today, and they're able to pass it in the House, but we're not able to make law on it until we get out of the Senate with 60. The other part of this, though, is there's only 8 states in the country that do full reporting for abortion survivors. So many states, and this is an area where state legislators and individuals can engage with their own states to say, what does our state do? How do we protect abortion survivors? So we're talking about this on a federal level, but every single state and every single person that's listening to this program right now should be able to say to their legislators, do we report abortion survivors? Do we require that? Do we require care for children in a botched abortion? My state in Oklahoma doesn't allow abortions. Many other states do not allow that. That's great. But for those states that do, as a minimum, we should also track botched abortions, where in this case, we typically think of a doctor who makes a mistake and a life is taken. In this case, a doctor makes a mistake and a life is actually protected. We should be able to know that, documented, and then to know what's done.
We just have a couple minutes left. Tomorrow's the March for Life, which has been held every year since the infamous Roe v. Wade Supreme Court decision. It's clear that even after the Dobbs decision and Roe was kicked to the dustbin of history, we still have a fight on our hands to, as we just talked about here, this common sense piece of legislation to provide aid to a child who survives an abortion. We can't agree on that as public policy. We've got a lot of work to do, Senator. Where do we go from here?
We do. Even though we weren't outside for an inauguration this week, we will be outside marching for life. It's just as cold in D.C., but those tough marchers are going to be out there standing up for the value of every single child. So that's extremely important. I'm telling people more and more, there are folks that are out there saying we should stop talking about this. This is a state issue. Don't discuss anymore. That's exactly the opposite thing we need. We need to talk about it more. Just like I think about 105 years ago, my wife and my daughters couldn't have voted. And I can't believe there was a time in America that women were not allowed to vote. And this generation looks back at that time and is appalled by it. I think 50 years from now, that generation will look back at now and say there was a season where we considered some children valuable and some children disposable, and they'll be appalled by it. But that doesn't happen accidentally. That happens because this generation talks about the value of every child, continues that dialogue, and we continue the work that will take a generation to accomplish, but let's keep going.
Josiah, and we cannot overlook the fact that this is spiritual in nature and when we look at this battle for life.
Yeah.
Josiah, I want to thank you for joining us. Senator Lankford, I want to thank you for joining us and for your continued fight for the unborn. We all greatly appreciate it. And Josiah, tell your father I said hello.
Will do.
Hey, his father did a great job in youth ministry, clearly, Tony.
Oh, I could tell you some stories. All right, gentlemen, have a great evening.